Good day everyone, I am Jujilin Flores and I am going to tackle with you the chapter 5 of part 1, which is Simone de Beauvoir and the Demystification of Woman. So first, let me introduce to you Simone de Beauvoir. So Simone de Beauvoir was one of the 20th century's leading intellectuals and certainly its most famous feminist. So her book entitled The Second Sex is a classical of feminist literature, radically challenged political and existential theory, but its most enduring impact is on how women understand themselves, their relationships, their place in society, and the construction of gender. So Simone de Beauvoir enrolled in private institutions and attended the Sorbonne, where in 1929 she passed her aggregation in philosophy and met Jean-Paul Sartre, beginning a lifelong association with him. So she taught at a number of schools from 1931 to 1943 before turning to writing for her livelihood. So next, so de Beauvoir, as an existential ethics, holds freedom as a universal. So meaning, each project we undertake must either turn its back on freedom or open up freedom for ourselves and others. So this requires people to achieve freedom, and yet our temptation is to actually shy away from the responsibilities of our freedom, even to the point of wanting to be more like an object than a human being. So members of oppressed groups have an even more difficult time of achieving freedom. So their expectations are constraining. So their destiny may even be shaped by the appearance that oppression is natural. So de Beauvoir discusses many forms of oppression, including that of the working class by the bourgeoisie, that of blacks by whites, and the oppression of Jews. But the main concern of her book, The Second Sex, is the oppression of women. So women's oppression differs from these other forms of oppression insofar as there appears to be no historical starting point for it, nor is there any solidarity of economic interest or even any social occasion for this oppressed group. So women are oppressed as women but separated from each other, and often have more in common with men of their social class than they do with other women from different classes. So de Beauvoir's aim in the first part of the book is to explore why women are oppressed, why they are the second sex, are females biologically inferior to males, do women follow the path of subservience described by psychoanalysis, or is it a consequence of their role as mothers or potential mothers? After examining and rejecting purely biological, psychoanalytical, and economic explanations, de Beauvoir turns to ontology. So when we see ontology, it is the study of being. So de Beauvoir's explanation for why women are oppressed is based on woman's being. That is what it means to exist as a woman. So woman also on her book was defined as other, and man was declared himself as the one. So by that book, girls growing up are taught by society how to be a woman. It may be passive or object-like, So a woman is a free being, mystified into believing she is confined to particular roles, thus limiting freedom. So using existential language, de Beauvoir says that woman has been defined as other. So the cult of the feminine or the feminine mystery is used to maintain the oppression of women, as the idea is passed down from generation to generation. So next, de Beauvoir uses the concepts of immanence and transcendence to further explain women's situation. So when we say immanence, it is a stagnation within a situation. It uses to describe the historic domain assigned to women, a closed-off realm where women are interior, passive, static, and immersed in themselves. While the transcendence, it is reaching out into the future through projects that open up freedom. And it designates the opposing male lot: active, creative, productive, powerful, extending outward into the external universe. So at times, these two concepts have been understood as body and consciousness respectively, but that misconstrues de Beauvoir's philosophy. So we are all embodied consciousness. So this is the condition for the possibility of our freedom. Although every existent or every human being is both immanent and transcendent, some social practices may imprison one in immanence such that one is unable to achieve transcendence or the freedom. So this happens in every case of oppression, insofar as they work on meaningful projects that reach into the future. Men occupy the sphere of transcendence, while women's oppression relegates them to the sphere of immanence until they may be no longer aware that they have free choice. So de Beauvoir refers to the start of the menstrual flow as a reminder to a girl of her immanence. So the menstruation is a monthly reminder of her attachment to the body as servant to the species via reproduction. So this, among other things, marks women as natural, so as opposed to being free. So they are subject to the vicissitudes of their bodies in a way that men are not. So it is in part through men's fleeing what is natural that women become the other. So de Beauvoir argues also that man declares himself as the one or self and the woman as other. So the one is the standard or the norm, and any deviation from the standard marks you out as other. So it is important to note that the self needs the other for its identity. So the self is the self in relation to what which is other. Conversely, the other gets its identity from the self. It is prescribed. So in part, it is the recognition of this relationship which compels the self to maintain the oppression of the other. So in addition, man sees in woman that which he lacks and he desires it. Thus, he must subordinate her to possess that which he lacks via control or domination. But the other also possesses a sort of existentialist threat to the self, because the other is living example of what could happen to the one. Excuse me. So it is important to remember here that de Beauvoir does not think that women are the only oppressed. So blacks are oppressed in relation to whites, and poor are oppressed in relation to the rich. So here whites and the rich become the norm, and blacks and the poor deviate from the norm and become the subordinate other. So, but in addition to the fact that women have always been oppressed, there is another important difference between the oppression of women and oppression based on class or race. So, women are complicit in their own oppression. In existentialist term, women internalize male gaze and with it the expectations of the gender. So they are conscious of how they are observed, and women's own thinking assimilates this awareness. Women then strive to live up to this model of the eternal feminine. So in other words, they become just what they are expected to become. Transcendent, existent, trapped in the immanence of being. So the Beauvoir offers a rich account of the myths and idols employed to maintain the image of femininity that women are expected to emulate. So one of the Beauvoir's famous line is that one is not born but rather becomes a woman. So this just means that one is not born anything. Everything we are is the result of our choices. As we build ourselves out of our own resources and those which society gives us. So we don't only create our own values, we create ourselves. So this line serves as a pivotal point for the book The Second Sex of de Beauvoir. So it begins to the second half wherein de Beauvoir describes the life of women from birth to adulthood. So this part of The Second Sex reveals many of the countless constraints inculcated since birth which inhibit a woman's ability to achieve transcendence or freedom. So de Beauvoir first takes us through childhood, commenting on such things as the dolls girls play with which prepare them for their future role, into adolescence where girls realize both that they are free and that their oppression sets up a situation where acting on that freedom is nearly impossible. So according to de Beauvoir, all women believe they ought to try to play the feminine role. So however, in The Second Sex, she discusses 3 kinds of women. So it has one kind, it has a prostitute, a narcissist, and a mystic rather. So the prostitute here is the absolute other. She is the main object. She is also, however, the exploiter. So the prostitute here is both for money and for the recognition of her otherness that she receives from the men. So as the narcissist then is similarly unable to be a subject, that is unable to freely pursue projects and goals for herself, and she turns instead to her otherness and becomes an object for herself. So the third one is the mystic. It tries to lose herself in God, to become identified in God. So she seeks to be possessed rather than seek freedom. So as an existentialist, de Beauvoir denied that there was any essence of women. There is no natural or universal characteristics that defines woman. So her identity is socially constructed. Like woman has been constructed by men, by a society which maintains ideological systems prescribing her subordination, and by women's own participation in those systems. So this situation limits a woman's freedom and determines her life projects. In other words, society keeps women blocked from freedom or transcendence. Therefore, liberation is both an individual and a social transformation. So, women must see herself like a man, as subject and not object. So, she must embrace her freedom and embrace projects which further disclose freedom. But women must also recognize themselves as a social group. Women must recognize their unity in their shared circumstances of oppression. So failing this assists in maintaining oppression. So there are also 3 strategies de Beauvoir suggests to aid women in their path to transcendence and subjectivity. These are 1. Women must go to work. 2nd, women must pursue and participate in intellectual activity, such as leading the change for women. And the 3rd one is women must strive to transform society into a socialist society, like seeking economic justice as a key factor in liberation. So, Simone de Beauvoir's monumental work on women ought not to be underestimated. So, by describing in vivid detail the countless ways women experience the limitations of femininity, she opened the way for women all over the world to recognize the social and political import of their personal experiences. So, de Beauvoir's works ushered in a new wave of feminist activism because she had the courage to make women's social, familial, bodily, political, and cultural experiences public. So what feminist philosophers like de Beauvoir aim to do is to open up a space for that freedom to flourish. So that's the end. So I guess you've learned from this chapter. Thank you for listening.